Well, welcome to BioGenerator. Before we start Innovators Hour, I wanted to acknowledge the devastating impact of last week's tornado on St. Louis and the St. Louis community, including, unfortunately, loss of life among people close to our colleagues in the BioSTL building. I'd like to thank everyone who is volunteering in the relief effort, including today's recovery work organized by the Cortex Innovation District, where we are located. And BioGenerator and BioSTL will continue to contribute our time and our resources to the recovery. So thank you all. So I'm Jim McCarter, Senior Managing Director of BioGenerator. And BioGenerator creates, builds, and invests in companies that are solving important problems in human health and agriculture. We're the startup arm of BioSTL, which is a nonprofit that helps to build the innovation ecosystem in St. Louis. So over the last 15 years or so, we've invested $50 million to help build 136 biotech companies here in St. Louis, also supporting those companies with talent and space. We've had 170 companies that have come through the BioGenerator labs here in Cortex, as well as the Helix Center, where many of our ag tech companies are located in 39 North. For today's Innovators Hour at BioGenerator, I'm pleased to speak with Steve Hanley, co-founder and CEO of MediBeacon. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you, Jim.
Yeah. So, Steve, you're originally from the Milwaukee area, and after studying finance at Marquette, you started a career in medical sales and marketing for companies that eventually became part of Covidien. And that included several moves around the United States before you and your family landed here in St. Louis. And that then you went on to lead the imaging business unit that has revenues exceeding 1.2 billion in annual sales. So question about kind of what led you to choose a career in healthcare imaging and to stay with that company through many moves and increasing responsibilities.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. I think the exciting thing when I was graduating from college is you really wanted to get into medical device sales or pharmaceutical sales. It was one of the most competitive areas. So that's a great place to start. And I've sold things from radiopharmaceuticals to contrast agents, anesthesia kits to doctors, as well as devices to compress your legs to prevent blood clots. So really exciting. In most cases, we thought we had the best products that we were selling. So as a rep, you wanted to win the deal because you thought you were servicing patients really well. But to then move around the country in different positions, you really follow people. And I was fortunate to have a really strong mentor here who's now the CEO of MyTech, who I followed him in about 15 years of progression to then take on the leadership role at Mallinckrodt Covidien.
Excellent. And so tell us a little bit about Mallinckrodt and the history here in St. Louis, because I know that goes back over 100 years and there's close ties to the radiology department at WashU and quite a story of kind of innovation in medical imaging, here in St. Louis.
Yeah, the Mallinckrodt family, which founded the company in, I think, 1857, so it's over 150 years,
wow.
Really has been a big part of the contrast agents that you use in your body to be able to image the heart or soft tissue. And one of 3 or 4 leading companies to innovate in that area. They've developed unique radiopharmaceuticals. For example, there's a agent for neuroendocrine tumors that they developed to really diagnose a very difficult to diagnose cancer. And now that product can be used as a therapeutic with a different type of energy used on it. So, really a great history in the Mallinckrodt Corporation itself. And then the Institute of Technology here, part of WashU, often credited with inventing the PET scan that many have heard of to be able to validate cancer, and a big part of new CT scans that came out years ago. So, in the imaging area in general, WashU and the Mallinckrodt Institute have been really a big part of it.
Mm-hmm. And can you take us through some of the corporate names? Because I know there have been some, consolidation and mergers and divestitures, and it's hard to keep track of all the various names.
Yeah, so I started with a company called Kendall, which was purchased by Tyco Healthcare, which was then became Covidien, and then Mallinckrodt Covidien. So Covidien then got purchased by Medtronic, and so that's really where the Covidien legacy companies are at this point.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so then during your time at Covidien, you met Rick Dorshow, who's, Rick, great to have you with us here today. And he's your co-founder of MediBeacon and the inventor of the underlying technology. So tell us a little bit about how you got to know Rick and about the work that he was doing in R&D at the time.
Yeah, we had a pretty large R&D group, but one of our top programs was called the optical diagnostic program. And this was the concept of using what people know as a pulse oximetry-like sensor that you put on your finger to check your oxidation level, but to measure your kidney function. And so Rick is a fantastic scientist, a physicist by training. He had a team of engineers and chemists to come up with an agent you would administer to the body that would fluoresce to be able to measure it on your skin. Took a lot of trial and error, but he was able to discover that with a great team of chemists. And with that, then, we invested more into a point where then the company started to split, where they were selling off imaging, they were going to sell some of the parts to other companies, and we knew then that this technology would become an orphan.
And so during that time at Covidien, and you were, leading the sales and the marketing and responsible for the revenue and the P&L, and how did you interact with the R&D teams?
Yeah, at the end, I transferred from the head of sales and marketing to the president of that division. So I had R&D and manufacturing as well. So Rick and his team reported up through me. So I knew very much exactly what that program was and the value that it had. But I also understood how when the sensing capability as Nellcor was going to be in a different entity, that we really wouldn't be able to develop it without that talent.
Got it. Yeah, and so before we dive deeper into the technology, let's talk a little bit about setting the stage, the state of the art of measuring kidney function today prior to the launch of your product. And how does that fall short in terms of meeting the needs of the millions of people that have failing kidney function? What is the problem really of measuring kidney function? So I know that we measure blood levels of creatinine, and then we plug that into an equation to derive the glomerular filtration rate. But that my understanding from you is that is often inaccurate.
Yeah, that's right. It's generally published that the accuracy of using serum creatinine, for a population is good, but for any individual can be really substandard. It can be delayed by a day or two because, as you know, creatinine is released by your muscles and it builds up in your blood. And if you have a higher amount, it suggests your kidneys aren't removing it adequately. Mm-hmm. So if you have high muscle mass or other factors, it can change for other reasons than your kidneys. And so we need another approach where you could measure that filtration directly. And that's really where the system that Rick and the team developed measures the fluorescence as it goes through the kidney directly. So you don't have to use equations or estimates or put in the gender or race or weight. It all does it directly from the fluorescent measurement in your body.
And how many millions of people are suffering from loss of kidney function?
Yeah, there's over 850 million people who have chronic kidney disease. And the challenge there is not that you have poor kidney function, it's just that the slope to get to end-stage kidney disease, where you have to be on dialysis, is really tragic. And that's what we want to prevent. If we can play a part in identifying it early and then working with companies that can treat it, the goal would be to have them never go to dialysis or never have a transplant. And that's where we think we can play a role.
And one of the things I hadn't appreciated until you and I were talking about this a few weeks ago was the importance of knowing the GFR in the context of cancer treatment and dosing of chemotherapy and adjusting for, because muscle mass can be highly variable in somebody undergoing cancer treatment. So tell me a little bit about that kind of proper dosing of chemotherapy with GFR.
Yeah, I think there's 3 areas that we think we can make an immediate impact. Transplant patients, where you want to know exactly how the kidneys are working without the delay of the markers. Mm-hmm. We have heart failure patients, for which that area is really difficult to measure in the hospital. And then you mentioned oncology, and that's really where, when you have muscle wasting, you're producing less creatinine. So they think erroneously that your kidney function is improving, but in reality, it's probably going down because the agents they're putting in, cisplatin, carboplatin, these are nephrotoxic or bad for the kidney. So we know that they're hurting them, and now we can measure it, we believe, directly. So that's a key study that's ongoing. We have several planned to be able to demonstrate how we'll be able to assess kidney function better, we hope, after the study than what they do currently. In our pivotal study and others, They weren't on patients with cancer, but even there we saw some marked improvement in how you could stage kidney function. We think that'll go to many different use cases.
Yeah, so now that we've sort of set up the problem a little bit, tell us more about the technology in terms of, you're sensing this molecule through the skin.
Yeah.
Kind of how does all that work? It sounds like it's both a medical device and it's also a pharmaceutical, and that molecule has to be stable. And what are all the sort of pieces that go into that technology?
I just happen to have, Jim, with me a sensor. This is the sensor that you wear on your skin, right? And so the really unique part about it is you place it on your chest area, so it's very stable. It actually adjusts for your skin color. So if you have light or dark skin, it adjusts so it has the right signal to noise. And then you administer our proprietary agent, which is called Lumitrace. And after that point, the agent goes everywhere in your body. And then after equilibration, it starts to be removed by your kidney. And we measure that rate through the proprietary algorithm. So really simple in some ways, but very elegant. And the algorithm is patented in all these areas that we had to develop here in St. Louis. Makes it so we can give that real-time, what we call TGFR, or transdermal GFR, to allow for that kidney assessment.
And so then the molecule isn't being metabolized by the liver; it's stable. So the only way to get rid of that molecule is through the kidney, right?
Yeah, maybe more information than you want to know, but it doesn't metabolize or bind to protein, and if you inject it into your body, it comes out completely intact in your urine. And that's very unique, and that was part of the challenge that the team discovered, is to have one that doesn't go through the liver and the kidney, but just the kidney. And that's one of the great innovations of the technology.
And so how long would somebody wear the sensor then to kind of get that slope, determine that slope?
Yeah, we can wear it up to 24 hours, because in some cases you want to monitor that and see the slope of that curve, especially if they're getting nephrotoxic medications, or if they're trying to improve it, you want to follow it. But generally within a few hours, you're able to get that real-time measurement, depending upon your GFR.
Because it's taking a data point every...
It takes a measurement 2.5 times a second.
Oh.
So it really gives a lot of data.
Right.
And then over that period, we can demonstrate that slope with the algorithm.
Okay, great. Hopefully that makes sense to people. And then if there's any questions, we'll get to questions at the end. We can go deeper into the technology if needed. So in 2012, you and Rick formed MediBeacon, and you were able to license the original TGFR intellectual property from Covidian. And I think it was around that time that you started working with BioGenerator. And so I'm curious, in what ways was the BioGenerator helpful to you in those early stages, other than investing in the company? And I think we have Eric Gulvey, who's here in the audience, who was part of those discussions.
Yeah, absolutely. I think before we even could get the product licensed, Rick and I had battled, so to speak, to make sure we could pull it out, right? So we had to negotiate the deal, and we worked closely with Eric and Charlie Bolton and Dad Broderick to guide us on different frameworks to propose to try to get it done. And that was very difficult. So we used their guidance and other experts to help us do that. So from the very beginning, they helped us in the advice side. And then the second group, as you know, they still do today, they put together about a 75-page booklet on MediBeacon after researching it with 50 doctors and checking our intellectual property. And they published a book that, with an initial investment of about $50,000, now we've raised over $80 million based on that initial framework, for which the BioGenerator was really one of the first 2 investors in the company.
Yeah, and we continue to do that today. We have a team of PhD scientists who can go deep on the technology as well as the business plan and the intellectual property. These are associates and senior associates and principals who are part of our team, and being able to create that diligence that we can then share with other co-investors or syndicate the investment with other investors is very important to our mission.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so as MediBeacon started operations, you had to go through an arduous process that took over a decade to get through the FDA approval and commercial launch. And so can you tell us about some of the kind of key breakthroughs that were happening over the last decade and how you were able to achieve those?
Yeah, I mean, everybody in this building itself has gone through a lot of regulatory processes, so we're not unique here. But when you have a new drug or a new device, you first have to show it's safe. So that takes millions of dollars, oftentimes in vitro studies or in animal studies to demonstrate this won't harm patients when you inject it. So that's a really big step to go through to show it's safe. Then you have to show it works, which then takes many different pilot studies and pivotal studies. And then the last one is show you can manufacture it. And so we have to make this at large scale, professional, GMP manufacturing facilities that are very expensive in the scale that you're going to do it at commercialization. So this takes many back and forth with the FDA. We were designated as a breakthrough device with the US FDA, which shows we were innovative. This allows a fast track, which 10 years doesn't sound like a fast track, but even with it, that approach, which was very collaborative with the FDA, that's still a long journey of managing through all those really important steps.
And you had to go through both the drug approval as well as the medical device approval. So how did that work?
Yeah, we started off as a drug device combination. So in every meeting we'd have 20 people from the device group and 20 people from the drug side, and we had to meet both regulations. They tried to combine that then, and since our product was determined to be inert, because it doesn't bind to protein or metabolize, we're a device-device PMA approval, which is a rigorous path. But you still have many people from the drug side overseeing you because you're manufactured like a drug since you're an injectable.
Right. And so, so one of the things I didn't know about MediBeacon is that you actually launched your first product in 2016 or thereabouts, and that was a research version of Lumitrace that was used in preclinical and is used in preclinical research. And you mentioned that not only did that generate steady revenue over the last 9 or so years, but also 650 publications where researchers have used that reagent to generate their results and publish those outcomes. So curious about how that process of providing a research tool was important to your success.
Yeah, it's really foundational. Most companies, when they start evaluating their drug, will test it in mice or rats or different species. And to be able to then understand the impact of their drugs on the kidneys, in some cases they want to affect the kidneys, and others they want to make sure they're not damaging the kidneys. We have a sensor about 1/10 the size of one that I just showed you that's placed on the animals, and then with the fluorescent tracer we can give that exact measurement that's been really now the gold standard to understand how the drugs or whatever they're doing for the animal studies, what's the impact. So we may have 75% of big pharma will use us routinely in their studies. We have hundreds of universities that use us routinely to understand the impact of the studies and the basic science they're doing, and again, the impact on kidney function without blood draws or urine collection or many other things you have to do currently to try to get a kidney measurement.
And did that kind of knowledge of use of your product translate from the researchers and the preclinical research teams to now providing some recognition by clinicians of the importance of the technology?
Yeah, so we've been at the large conventions in Europe and the US for years, and it gives awareness. There's confidence then in that the system works. And in animals, it's very well trusted. So now, whether it's in diabetic patients or heart failure patients, the design for the studies that we're going to be in humans have been done in many cases in animals, so they'll be able to be duplicated. And to give you an example, there's a study done in France a few years ago where they demonstrated the estimated GFR for patients after 6 weeks was down about 10%, and with the measured approach, it was down almost 60%. So the treatment and the understanding of what's happening for the patient would be dramatically different. Again, this was in an animal study, but we expect and hope we'll demonstrate our ability to elucidate that for doctors once they use it in humans.
Yeah, so maybe tell us a little bit more about kind of the launch of the product that is coming up, hopefully if things go well before the end of the year.
Yeah, so we have full FDA approval for our first generation product. We have product coming in the third quarter of this year, and we have the large kidney conference in the beginning of the fourth quarter. So that's our plan, is to launch the technology in the fourth quarter. We have a lot of incoming demand that we're holding and talking to the hospitals and potential pharmaceutical companies with the availability for the product launch in that fourth quarter.
In the United States. And is that then the first launch in the world, is in the US?
Yeah, we have full approval on the sensor and the device and agent here in the United States. We received in the first quarter also approval for the device and sensor in China. and we expect to have full approval in China by the end of the year. So those are the two big regions where we did human studies. And we've also filed for what's called the MDR, which is the device approval in Europe. We anticipate that here in the next 12 months as well. So we expect all regions to be covered, which was, one of our core strategies, sometime by the end of this year.
Excellent. Yeah, and so then turning from the technology to the team, I think you have about 30 employees right now. And Dina's in the audience as well, along with Rick. And tell us a little bit about how you built the team. I know you brought many people from Covidien that you had a long working relationship with, but also you brought in outside talent, and also then acquisitions. I think maybe a company in Germany that you acquired.
Yeah, first of all, the team we've developed, much of that backbone is from Covidien that Rick or I have worked with for 20 plus years. So we were fortunate to bring on that talent who worked on the project at Covidien. So that there was a quick ramp up, but we needed to bring additional talent in. Our head of R&D, we didn't work with directly at Covidien, but he was the head of the big supply business here and based in St. Louis. His name is Jim Haar, really instrumental. We have a woman named Laura Vitale, who's our head of quality. These are roles that are difficult to find, but through our networking, it was really meant that we could pull them into the organization. And that's really when everything changed, when we could bring that talent in. And then we acquired a company in Germany in that 2016 timeframe that really focused on that animal area. They had some unique technology there that was very collaborative with what we had. So that's really helped us go to that next level to bring the company forward and get to FDA approval.
Excellent. And so let's talk about the rest of the pipeline, because this isn't a one product company. You've got a whole series of things that are coming, that are in the works. So tell us more about those other products.
Yeah, Lumitrace itself is the backbone to it, this fluorescent technology that we have as an injectable right now, which we have other ways that we can administer that to the body. The program we've done first in man studies on is for GI permeability. So you can imagine a patient with Crohn's or ulcerative colitis. These are difficult diseases for which you often have to do endoscopies to understand how they're doing. The vision we have and we've shown in human studies is you take our agent in the capsule or you drink it, and then you wear a sensor and you'll be able to see if you have a leaky gut. And with that, you'll see if an inflammatory response, as you may know, follows a leaky gut. So if you have inflammation, your gut will leak more than if you have tight junctions and it's healed. And so we can give the physician an understanding of whether is inflammation there or not without having to do a scope or work on their symptoms.
And so those are different molecules that have it?
It's the same molecule. That's the beauty of all the safety work. It's the exact same Lumitrace, just packaged, or you would consume it orally instead of having it be injected.
Oh, I understand. Okay, I missed that part. Okay.
Yeah, and then we also have an eye program that's FDA approved to begin to start using it to visualize the eye, so to check for leaky eye disorders. You administer the agent via an IV, and through a camera you can see if there's things like macular degeneration or diabetic retinopathy. So that's another program we have.
So the molecule would be getting out of the bloodstream and into the eye, is that?
Yeah, just by naturally being in your vasculature, it'll glow and it'll be able to see if the vessels are leaking in the eye.
I see.
To really kind of identify these specific disease states.
Yeah, and so you've got the safety data, and then you need to build then the efficacy data to show that those products or those applications of the product do what they say. So where are you in that process? The
good part is the safety part is really established. So now we just have to demonstrate that it meets the standard that the FDA decides. So we're working with them to determine that standard. But the manufacturing is already there and the safety. So it's really that middle part. So we hope over the next 12 to 18 months, we'll be able to do the studies to show they can be used in these other applications.
Excellent. Yeah, and then before we talk more broadly about biowearables and all, tell us a little bit about your family's journey through all of this, because that was interesting to hear, kind of about the moves, and then deciding to stay in St. Louis and raising your family here, and your volunteer activity as well.
Yeah, I mean, maybe as I listen to other entrepreneurs, they maybe start young before they have families, and some of the challenge that comes with that. Fortunately for me, we have 5 children. We had 5 children by the time we started MediBeacon. So we had to navigate, obviously, the challenge of starting a new company with the kids. But we know we wanted to stay in St. Louis. They were all in school, and now they're all out of high school, and really excited to be able to do that here in St. Louis. But we've had, when moves from Milwaukee to Boston, to Baltimore. All of those, we've had a child in each location, and we wanted to settle down here in St. Louis.
And then in terms of your volunteer work, first I'd like to thank you for the volunteer work you do with BioGenerator as a key member of our investment advisory committee and helping us to make good decisions and think through our processes. But then you do additional volunteer work as well.
Yeah, well, one of the passions I have, I've been on the YMCA of the Gateway YMCA for almost 20 years now, and I'll be the chairman this year. It's a fantastic organization. They have 27 Ys. They really service the community, much like the Cortex has during this difficult times with the tornadoes, and really proud to be a part of that organization as a board member.
Excellent. Well, thanks for all that you do in that regard. And then you had brought up the idea of having kind of a broader discussion around biowearables, and that your sensor that works with Lumitrace, is indeed a biowearable, and that's something I've been working on as well. So, kind of curious your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, we see so many correlations between pulse oximetry, where they check for oxidation level, and it's become really a new vital sign. We know glucose monitoring to measure and monitor the glucose levels is so critical for care and to manage the metabolic state. So I think in the future, we believe we'll have we have that already in the pipeline of a mobile GFR monitor. This can be administered at home. And I think there's so much to learn as we have different patches and ways to manage health by giving feedback instantly. So I was curious of your experience and how that's worked and how that's evolved from just maybe for really sick diabetic patients to now really healthy patients, right?
Yeah, and so around 2015, I got involved in working on metabolic diseases and working on type 2 diabetes and disease reversal with a company called Virta Health. And Doug Hilbert is here, who worked on that project with me. And we were doing kind of daily time points, right? So we were checking glucose and ketones and weight once a day with our patients. But I got intrigued by the opportunity for more continuous data and how that can be kind of a richer experience for patients to make decisions. And so I spent 5 years with Abbott Laboratories, first in Abbott Diabetes Care, and then we spun out a biowearables division called Lingo that launched the first over-the-counter continuous glucose meter to make that technology more widely available so that people that didn't necessarily have diabetes, but were just generally interested in their nutrition could have access to that technology. And so when you're getting a data point for glucose every 5 minutes, as opposed to once a day finger stick, the richness of that data to be able to see, okay, here was my glucose response to a meal, and to learn from that is just night and day in terms of the information.
Yeah, no, I think it's going to be similar now in a hospital setting. What we'll be able to demonstrate is kind of that real-time assessment of whether it's diet or medications or fluid management, what's happening with the kidney. And then in the chronic market, which will be outpatient, that's a future opportunity for us in a similar way. So how do we make it so people are more aware of their kidney function, what's impacting it? So, more to come. We have to demonstrate some of that, but when the core technology is approved, it allows us to much more quickly move to some of those dream ideas we have where it can be part of everyday life.
Yeah, and I know that my colleagues at Abbott are thinking about those things as well, so that some of us spun out to form this consumer biowearables division, but then folks within Abbott Diabetes Care are continuing to work on things like hospital applications of wearable biosensors, including a dual glucose ketone sensor for people with type 1 diabetes to detect diabetic ketoacidosis, for instance. So there are medical applications and consumer applications, hospital applications, outpatient applications.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good example. One of the fortunate things we found, maybe more in the hospital, is that though our agent is measuring kidney function, one of the things we've seen is that if you administer it when someone's in surgery and you change the wavelength of light in surgery, it actually lights up the ureters, which is an area of injury they want to avoid. So again, just try to find other applications for it. We think, again, that's another way that the fluorescence being used and being able to identify areas to prevent adverse events might be another application for us.
That's fascinating. Yeah. Well, let's open it up to broader questions from the audience, and we have plenty of time here, and so if I'll just try to call on people, and then I'll repeat the question here, but just try to speak loudly so that folks can hear. But what questions do folks in the audience have? Yes.
So I just recently read a statistic that 90% of chronic kidney disease patients don't even know that they have chronic kidney disease. So would this help to identify them early and then help that offset of them going to dialysis?
Yeah, no, I think that's right. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to repeat the question so that something like 90% of patients that are losing kidney function don't realize it, right? So could you detect it earlier, make them aware of it earlier to intervene?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we see is many of the challenges I talked about where your creatinine levels have to drop to a level. Oftentimes you have to lose half of your kidney function is what they say before it elevates to a level where you see that concern. So we really think we'll be able to demonstrate that we can see it much earlier. And, we give Dr. Steve Miller, who's our chief medical officer, often says that you can take out both of your kidneys. If you check your kidney function using serum creatinine within a few hours, it'll still say they're working great, right? That's a problem. So we want to be able to demonstrate that we'll show immediately when you have that challenge. And those are some of the studies we have planned. So I do think it's an important opportunity.
Great question. Eric, and then two rows back.
So, Steve, for some of these home uses that you envision for the future, how would you then give the tracer? You're not going to be giving an infusion to yourself at home, right? So, would you be making it orally available, and then it's a different time frame to make the measurement, or how would that be? And
I'll just repeat that. So, for the home use, what's the administration? And maybe you could talk about IV versus intramuscular. I know are two different ways to deliver it in the hospital setting or the clinical setting. But then for home use, how are you delivering the Lumitrace?
Yeah, we currently believe a subcutaneous approach, like you might see with some of the Ozempic medications, works very well. We get a good distribution in some of our experiments. So we believe that would be the easiest way to do it. Orally is something that's more of a challenge because, like we've shown with our GI program, if you have a healthy gut, it probably won't come out of your gut in a way that could be then measurable for your GFR. So we do see that subcutaneous administration, hopefully like something you might see with the very convenient pens they have with Ozempic, and then have the sensor on your skin.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, how long can the reagent stay in the body before you do the test?
How long does the reagent stay in the body before the test, but also just even after the test? How long does it take to?
For most patients, if it's in your body, it's out of your body within about 8 hours. So you can measure it and kind of monitor your GFR for that period. If you have really low GFR, we're able to monitor for about 24 hours. So it obviously goes out much slower through your body. And so we'll give you measurements every 15 minutes. We'll give you a sense for where your kidney function is for that time. And then there's a period for it which it has to be washed out to baseline before you re-administer it. And so that depends on your GFR of when you could re-administer it and do another cycle.
Let's do 1, 2, 3. Yeah, go ahead.
When in the process did you branch out from just the kidney use case to the other GI use case and the eye use case? And what was the thought process for branching out versus focusing on that one?
Yeah, and so beyond just the original use of Lumitrace for kidney function, when did you start thinking about these other use cases, and how did you kind of integrate that into the plan?
Yeah, I think when we purchased the technology, we had ideas behind just the GFR program and maybe some concept of the surgical visualization, but it really wasn't through some collaborations with Washington University that some of the other ideas came about. There's a Dr. Phil Tarr who came to us with some ideas of how fluorescence could help the GI permeability. And so with some grants that we were able to get through the Gates Foundation and some others, we were able to do some of these initial experiments. But the caution I have for our whole team is that we need focus so much on the kidney program because dollars are very limited. So we have great ideas, and with FDA approval, we have a little more freedom to try some of these others. But we're very careful to get the GFR program. It has such huge potential to change the game that we're focused on that with really a laser focus. But it really was about 2 years into forming MediBeacon that we discovered the GI program.
Great. You had a question there.
Yeah, can you speak at almost to how the filtering is done from that, I imagine, fairly noisy sensor data, and how you interpret that?
So when you get the data coming off the sensor, there may be noise in that data, and how do you kind of smooth that or remove the noise out of the data?
Yeah, so remember, I'm the sales guy in the company. But we generally have a really great sensing system where we shine blue light and it emits green. And then the patents cover what's called diffuse reflectance in the body to help subtract out the volume and the changes in blood. So you can actually detect then the filtration rate that we're getting as compared to what might be happening in the blood. So Rick's going to quiz me on this afterwards if I was close, but generally that's what I think we try to do with the filtration.
Richard,
Close enough, Rick? Yeah. Thank you.
and then back there. So Richard, go ahead.
Do you have any collaboration or interest from biopharma like theirs, Venenrum, that minimizes decline in kidney function, with therapies where they would like to identify the patients or monitor progress or drive market development? Anything happening there?
And so in terms of pharmaceutical collaborations or uses of your technology in the pharmaceutical industry as they characterize their drugs?
Yeah, I think I wouldn't name any specific names, but you could check the publications on most of the big pharma where they use our drugs to be able to see who's used ours. But absolutely, there's a whole group of drugs. The GLP-1 agonists are one. There are many you've mentioned exactly that impact kidney disease. And I think it's really an important point because, as an example, the GLP-1s are known to have some impact on muscle mass, right? And so that's the same issue with cancer patients. So whether they may show they're demonstrating an improvement in kidney function, but really is that just a reduction in the serum creatinine levels being produced because of the lack of muscle mass. So those are really important targets for us. We think that pharmaceutical industry can really benefit from using our system in the future. We hope, like we've seen in the animal studies, you can reduce the number of animals oftentimes by large percentages because we're more accurate. And the impact, obviously, to patients would be dramatic, and the cost savings would be dramatic if we could get to their endpoints sooner. So, yeah, that's an important area for us.
I think you had a question there, and then we'll go back over here. Go ahead.
For biowearables in general, what's something that you guys are struggling with in terms of, I guess, construction to design the device? Because it seems like it's a no-brainer to just give this information for the physicians to use. So, like, is it hard to make? Is it too heavy? Is people just not like sticking some of them? Or what's a problem you guys have noticed in the last 5 years?
So the question about kind of challenges or problems in the biowearables space. Yeah, and if you want to go first, and then I have some thoughts.
Yeah, I think it'd be different for you. So I think the piece for us is really the HIPAA and the security elements are really a challenging piece for us. Our first generation is actually cabled, like you might see in the hospital setting, because the amount of regulatory pieces to have it be wireless through the different systems like Bluetooth are really onerous, and we wanted to show that technology works before we met some of the details of what's needed for HIPAA and cybersecurity risks. So that we think is something it's known how to do it, but it takes dollars to be able to get it right. So that's our biggest concern is, I would say, the cybersecurity and the managing the HIPAA compliance if you're not really in a tight area.
I'd point out in the consumer realm that, so I've got an Oura Ring and an Apple Watch and Abbott Lingo glucose biosensor. I wear the ketone biosensor as part of a clinical study. And one of the challenges is making that data understandable and actionable to people, whether it's somebody who's a patient or a consumer. And so with the Lingo glucose product, that your glucose spikes throughout, with your meals, but it also spikes when you exercise. And also, if you sleep on the sensor and create pressure on the sensor, you get an artifactual lowering of the signal overnight that then is not telling you anything useful. It's just an artifact. And so how do you make this information kind of useful to people in their daily decision making? How do you educate people about something like understanding glucose and understanding metabolism? And so one of the things that we did in the process of creating that product was to create something called Lingo Count. And Lingo Count is basically trying to quantify the spike or the rise in glucose that occurs after a meal. But to do that, we had to build a spike detector. And so we had to kind of create the algorithms around what is a spike of a given size. And so those are kind of the challenges around data interpretation and creating useful data in a way that's actionable for people. Yes?
Can you talk about the patient sample size for the FDA approval?
So sample size for FDA approval.
Sure. We had 200 patients roughly in our study. And that was designed, with the FDA. We had what's called a pre-submission meeting where we present the endpoints that we're proposing, and they would agree with it because though it's not a necessary step, you really want to have them agree that if you meet these endpoints, you get approved. So it was about 200 patients in about 6 sites here in the US, and we had 3 sites in China. And that was, and so about 8 or 9 sites globally was for the pivotal study.
Were they all kidney disease patients or are they healthy patients?
And so healthy versus kidney disease patients.
Yeah, it's a really important part. So we had patients with really low GFR, down to about 10 GFR, up to 120 was the study design. So these are healthy patients, if you can call that, with patients with really difficult kidney function, but they were generally healthy, stable patients in that group. And then we also had to be clear to enroll enough patients in each of the 6 skin colors, the way the FDA defined it at the time. So we had really light skin colors, which was a 1, or darker skin colors were 6. So we had to have a minimum amount of patients in each of the skin colors to demonstrate that it could be used on all types of patients.
We've talked a lot about the science and the details of the MediBeacon technology, but maybe just a broader question for budding entrepreneurs in the audience. You've been very successful in terms of raising funds for this company over the years, and so what advice would you give to people who are, considering starting a technology company, or maybe are somewhere along that journey and are having to raise additional funds?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I have any secret sauce. I think people generally say it costs more than you expect, and that even though you may be well-intentioned, the regulatory hurdles and the time for manufacturing is much longer than you anticipate. So I think we would obviously agree with that. It is a relationship piece and a communication element with your current investors, since we've had investors now with us for 12 plus years. So we hope, communicate with them. We have our annual shareholder meeting coming up here next week. So we try to communicate with those. And that existing base of business, or investor base, I should call it, are the ones that you often have to lean on when you need to extend your cash position. And then when you get another great investor or a strategic, then it allows you to network through that. So I think if you treat your current investors well and transparently, it allows you to then raise more capital even through their connection. So I think it's one of the key elements I think that we've been able to do.
Yes, Eric.
So Steve, now that you've got product approval, the next phase is about selling the product. So what is your strategy around, are you going to look to be acquired sooner rather than later by someone who will propel your sales, or what are you thinking in terms of how you move forward in the next phase?
So the questions around sales and beginning to scale, and then also acquisition.
Yeah, I mean, we're exploring, would be the term we use, all the options. So we have a banker we're working with. We're looking at opportunities for strategic alignment, but we also know we have this fantastic opportunity to launch the technology and improve and increase the value of the company. So we have to really identify all those opportunities. So we're doing that. So we have probably 3 parallel paths that we're looking at right now. We have a cash position now that allows us some of that flexibility, but we're excited about the potential we have.
Great. Well, thank you, Steve, for spending this valuable time with us. And thank you for all you've done for St. Louis in terms of growing a successful community, or a successful company here, I should say, and then all you've done giving back to the community.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. And again, I think the BioGenerator, again, I mentioned it before, the initial 50,000 to where we were today really came from all the work the BioGenerator did from the beginning. So thanks, Jim.
Thank you.